Hello, and welcome to episode 211 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I am Zach Wilkerson, and I am joined today by Hilary Andreff.
Hi, everyone. I have my pet hedgehog here with me on my lap, and she's going to be playing the role of, she's going to be my puffy today.
I need a puffy. My cat is also in the room right now, but he is not in my lap, so he'd probably meow a lot if he was, so I should probably keep him over there. But speaking of Puffy, we're here to talk about Grandia again, Part 2. And so I'm curious, Hilary, before we even start, Part 2, did it live up to Part 1 for you?
You know, in a lot of ways, in some ways it did, in some ways it didn't,
Okay.
I would say. I thought a lot more about the second half of the game. Like it was a little more introspective than I was expecting, which was interesting. But there were just some points, and this is just kind of a nitpicky thing, where I felt like some of the dialogue and some of the really great localization that I fell in love with, I feel like kind of as things started really, really going in the second half, some of that kind of fell off a little bit in some areas. That was a little disappointing.
Yeah, no,
I agree. What about you?
I think that the once the plot machinations start sort of hitting in full gear, which happens maybe, 5 or 6 hours after where we're going to start talking about Grandia, I feel like it loses some of its charm. I think that part of it is that it's so earnest throughout the rest of the game, but once the plot really starts rolling and rolling, gets very serious and save the world, it loses some of its charm, and it loses some of what I think gives the first half its identity.
I was going to say, that whimsy is really a defining characteristic up until some of the points we're going to be talking about today, and then it's not quite as present.
Yeah, and I can't remember, did you say that you had finished Grandia all the way through before?
I got pretty close.
Okay.
And I don't think I did the bonus dungeons or anything, but I think we were at the final battle, if not. And I knew what happened in the ending.
Okay.
At any rate.
I mean, I can't wait to talk about the ending, because that is one thing about the second half that I do love. But, I mean, it's funny because, and I think I might have mentioned this in the last podcast, when I played this game originally, I was very young. I was like 14, and maybe not the right audience for the tone of Grandia. And I remember I beat the game really quickly once I got to the last third, because I was like, oh, now here's the game that I thought I was going to play. Here's some story. You've actually given me something, and I just did not appreciate the localization and the tone. I just remember really liking the ending. One of the party members, Liette, once you get her, I remember being like really hyped about her, and she's cool still in this version of it. But it's still now looking at it as a slightly older person, I definitely prefer the tone of the first half.
Kind of odd how that happens.
Yeah. There are some things I like better about the second half, though, and I guess we'll talk about that. I think that the dungeon design becomes significantly less annoying here, except for maybe the final dungeon. The final dungeon's a little bit rough, I think. But in general, I thought that I didn't find myself getting lost nearly as frequently in the second half.
I will agree with that.
And I thought the battle system was even more fun in the second half, too, because some of the skills are starting to come together. And so many more skills are being unlocked as you go, like Dragon Cut, which I mentioned in the first half. I just you get like 64 points like every time you use it for your weapon, and so then my axe is like level 70 by like 20 minutes of grinding, and then Justin is just an unbelievable powerhouse, and I love breaking games. It's like my favorite thing to do. So I did like that part.
Yeah, I mean, once you've spent the time in the first half and get to that point, you really finally have enough options to do that sort of thing and find the combinations and find the things that work to get those various skills up quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
It really starts to come together.
Yeah. So I guess it would be, I think it's probably important that we give a quick recap of where we were. So where we left off, we had Justin and Fina and Sue and Gadwin at the top of the Typhoon Tower, and they're in front of two mirrors, and they have to decide which one to go through in order to save Dite Village. And Justin goes through, and he ends up almost getting killed while he does that, but the Spirit Stone saves him, and he finds himself down at the bottom of the Typhoon Tower. Once they come down from the tower, they go back to Dite Village, and Dite Village, as usual in Grandia, everybody gives them a huge warm welcome. thanks for saving us again, like, because they save everyone. I think the entire world is saved by Justin at some point over the course of this adventure, which is one of the reasons why it's sometimes hard to keep track of the
there's
plot
a real, well, it is, because it's a series of villages with problems, and there's kind of like a local dungeon where you have to fix the problem. And this one, it's the spear. And there's a cute little ceremony where Justin gets to put the spear at the top of this little platform, and he and Fina get matching armbands because she decided which door to go through, and he went through it.
Yeah. So once you leave Dite Village, you find yourself on the way to the Twin Towers, which is another, like, sort of ancient ruin to help you find your way to Alent, an Angeluian ruin, which again is sort of the kind of common thread of this game. You're always there's always another ruin for you to go find. You get one more piece of information about Alent. And it sounds like I'm annoyed by that, but I'm actually not, because I like the rhythm of that. I think that's the part of this game that works really well. But you find yourself in one of the more ridiculous situations in this game, in Gumbo Village, where Gadwin tells you, "Oh, this is going to be an amazing town. There's a festival going on right now. It's going to be awesome." And they get there.
It's like Rio.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get there, and, like, where is everyone? And they're like, "Oh, where is everybody? Where's everybody at?" So eventually they do find where everybody is, and the village elder's like, "Oh, you two must be the special couple and the two special guests of honor."
And everyone, you find out everyone's kind of hiding from each other because the men and women in this village are avoiding each other.
They are avoiding each other, which seems very strange when you arrive. Like, well, why wouldn't you want to be the special guest of honor? That sounds delightful. Well, it turns out it's not. So Justin and Fina, it turns out, are sacrifices to, I believe it's the fire dragon god or something like that. Is that what they call?
Yeah, they say there's a dragon at the center of the volcano.
Yeah, there's a dragon at the center of a volcano, and they're going to get fired via cannon up to the top of that volcano, which is actually exactly what happens.
Which, of course, catches Justin by surprise more than Fina.
Yeah,
Fina kind of...
I think I know this is happening, yeah. But Justin never does.
I think something's up.
Yeah, but Justin's not always the sharpest about these things. Man, I love that moment. It's so funny. But of course, Sue and Gadwin come up to help you, and they come up to save you, and they do. And
then they find you. You beat the dragon.
Yeah, you beat the dragon, of course, and you go back to town, and you've defeated the dragon, and once again you've saved a village. Which again, rhythm of Grandia.
So yes, yep. So the village is not cold anymore, and the men and women can socialize again, and all that good stuff, and you get the epithet of being the brave couple, which is yet another situation where Justin and Fina are categorized as a couple.
Yeah, and this is really before you get much of a vision for the fact that the two of them even have any sort of a romantic interest in each other, which I'm really glad about, actually, because it makes the whole thing even more uncomfortable.
It is. And I kind of marked this as a little bit of a turning point, because there's this little islet in Gumbo that's supposed to be the most romantic spot, and like only the best fated couples can go there. And Justin and Fina go there, and they see a bunch of spirits, like these little lights, and it's a really pretty cutscene.
Yeah.
And that's when Fina starts to kind of try and tell Justin how she feels, and Justin's pretty oblivious.
Yeah, of course he is. I mean, it's a pretty light touch here, but yeah, that is one of my favorite sequences in the whole game. Just like it's romantic in just the right way. It doesn't feel cheesy. It doesn't feel over the top. It feels totally earned, because you spent, at this point, we're like 20 hours into the game, and you've spent like maybe 15 hours with these two together, and you can see how the rhythm of the two of them works. And I think especially just coming out of Typhoon Tower, you can see just how important Justin is to Fina. So it's a moment that I think absolutely works, even though it could come off as cheesy.
Yeah, they did do some work establishing how much she cares about him beforehand, so it pays off. I agree.
Yeah. And so after that, you finally make your way to the Twin Towers, which is the Angelou ruin, where you're going to find out, again, more information about Alent. And this is actually one of maybe my favorite dungeon and one of my favorite sequences in the whole game, because when you go into the dungeon and you find your way in, eventually the Garlisle forces are there and you get separated. And the important part for me is that you end up going through the dungeon. So Justin ends up going through the dungeon with Lean, and Fina goes through it with Mullen.
I think this is good foreshadowing for very late game stuff, actually. So I like looking back on it now. That just kind of clicked, and it was especially interesting, like the precise way they paired people off. I'll try not to spoil it any more than that yet, but yes.
Yeah. Don't worry, listeners, we'll get there. I think that it sort of goes through, and Mullen explains a lot about the Angelou civilization and a lot about his own background with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes him, he's already pretty sympathetic because I think he likes Justin so much. And I think that they do a great job of sort of allowing those two to play off of each other. It helps develop Fina even and Mullen a lot. And I love how that relationship comes to bear later, again, as you said, on the game. But maybe even better, I like the interactions between Justin and Lean. Because you can sort of see the same sorts of rhythms that he and Fina have to some degree, but also like they're constantly at odds about the Spirit Stone. And eventually Justin gives her the Spirit Stone because she just is continually after him about it. But then later, after she gets to know Justin a little bit more, she gives it back.
Yeah, she's very conflicted because she's extremely loyal to Mullen.
Right.
She starts out by saying, I will take you down. I don't care if I get out of this tower because I'm supposed to get that stone. It's my duty. So I'm going to take it even if that means, I have to fight off all these other enemies myself. And Justin says, well, if you're really going to be that short-sighted, I'll just give it to you. So he gives her the Spirit Stone. And now can we get out of here together, please?
Yeah.
Basically.
Please. The one time in the whole game that Justin is slightly practical. It's like, all right, I just want to get out of here now. Please. But I think that the moment that she gives him back the Spirit Stone is really lovely. And makes, again, a moment that we'll talk about later, particularly powerful.
Yes.
Because I think that she's such a great character. And she's developed so well, even with relatively little screen time.
They do a lot with her with just periodic time and short scenes. Scenes with her usually aren't very long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that her connection to Fina ends up helping us a lot, but she seems realistic and she seems developed, despite the fact that she makes really quick changes sometimes in what she's doing or the decisions she's making. She does them almost all throughout the game, where she seems to be working both ways, but somehow, even with the limited screen time, I'm able to buy that she would be this conflicted.
Mm-hmm.
So after you leave there, you have a discussion about a way to cross the sea. But then Gadwin says, nobody crosses that sea because you realize you need to cross the sea again in order to get to Alent.
Yes. The next phase in your journey, East Alencia, which is way the hell across the sea.
Yeah.
And you learn that it's evil mermaid season, and it's really dangerous for pretty much anyone.
And we find out just how evil those mermaids are in a little bit here.
Yes.
Yeah, and even Gadwin, who is the strongest, toughest guy, he's like, nobody really does that. You should not do that. So we're just going to go get this stone that teleports you wherever you want to go. And I'm like, what? How is there a stone that teleports you wherever you want to go?
All right.
Why didn't we know about this earlier?
And it's kind of funny because you're talking about this around the guy who's supposed to be this awesome sailor and the best boatsman in Gumbo, and he's just like, nope, there's no way I would ever take you. And he has a girlfriend too. It's so funny because everyone in that town is a couple, and they're just kind of waiting for Justin and Fina so that they can be together. I don't know.
Really anyway. But another thing that's important to note here is that when they're back at the village, Sue gets sick. She passes out and she can't continue forward. And so they decide to go get this orb without her. And this is going to allow her to recover for a moment.
And the person taking care of her is Dr. Alma, who you met along with Gadwin in the Valley of the Dragon.
Yeah. And so then in order to get that orb, you go off to the mysterious Vanishing Hill, which is a really strange sequence in this game. I'm not sure that I have a clear enough memory, because it's been a couple months since I played this, full disclosure. I can't remember exactly what happens to the mysterious Vanishing Hill now.
It's surprisingly straightforward plot-wise. There's a little kind of like Ikarian technology little dais at the base of it, and that's where you're supposed to put the orb, but the orb is at the top of the hill. So you have to backtrack and get a series of keys to open various doors to get up the hill to the orb, and there are these almost like robotic-looking guards that you have to pass at a couple points, to get up there.
Yeah, and so then once you go up there and you get the orb, you go back, and Sue tells you that she can't go on with the journey anymore. She's done. She's
mm-hmm.
too much. She can't keep up. She's too small. There's just so much energy with Fina and Justin. And one of the things I loved about this moment is because, and we talked about this a little bit in the first half, you know, I feel like a lot of times the play with Sue would be like, oh, she notices that Justin and Fina are falling in love and she can't handle it anymore. And that's not what it is. It's just literally, this is not who I am.
It almost seems like a moment of maturity on her
right.
part, because she puts her foot down and says, no, guys, I'm younger than you. I'm significantly younger than you. I'm not as strong. I'm going to get sick again, or sicker, if I keep going. I can't. And it's actually Justin who kind of tries to push a little bit at first, because, you know, she's been there for him and he wants her to come along. But everyone eventually kind of convinces him and comes to the decision that it's best for Sue to go back. And, you know, you can tell, I mean, that scene got to me so much, because you can tell that Sue is not happy about this on some level internally, that she feels a little bit like it's a failure on her part, but she knows she has to do it. Mm-hmm. Because she's trying not to cry as she kind of walks past the teleportation orb back to Parm.
Right. And I'm not sure if we mentioned this, but the teleportation orb they end up giving to Sue for use to go back to Parm, yes. Which is, you know, it seems a little bit cheap in narratively, like they set this up and you can sort of see the plot machinations there. But I still like that they have to make the sacrifice for her, even in this way, and they're willing to do it. There's no conversation about making the sacrifice. They just do it. And Justin doesn't want to accept it, but he does. And I think that it is a great moment for developing the maturity of Sue, but also sort of forcing Justin to become more mature and realizing that his way isn't everyone's way. Which is interesting, given that he wanted to leave her behind at the beginning, but now he's the one who's fighting it. And they think he can't get used to it.
And Afina going, Sue, it's okay to cry. Oh, man.
Yeah. It's such a lovely moment. It's really one of my highlights of this game. But then maybe something even more sad happens, because we lose someone who's actually good and bad. At least for me. Gadwin was a beast. Because then Gadwin says, hey, Justin, you're ready. You don't need me anymore. So it's time for you to go off and for you to go cross the sea on your own, which is very surprising. Maybe he's just scared of the mermaids. I think maybe he's just making an excuse because of the mermaids. But
well, at the same time saying like, yes, I'm going to go train and get stronger too.
Yeah. And then you have to do a one-on-one duel with him again, which is very, very easy. It's too easy, actually. It was like, oh, come on. Like I don't think he hit me a single time in the whole fight. But the best part, and I've talked about this like 7 times now.
I think he hit me once.
He hit you once? Well, I mean, he just doesn't, I mean, I think it's definitely a fight that is designed to allow you to just keep pushing him back on the meter.
Yep.
But at the end of that fight, you learn Dragon Cut, which, again, as I've said maybe 7 times now on this podcast, is such an awesome skill for leveling up the rest of your skills, that the rest of the game, for the most part, becomes much easier in the random battles. But you need to abuse that skill in terms of grinding and take down a couple of the boss battles, which do get surprisingly difficult a couple times in Disc 2, which is what we're about to flip over to. Mm-hmm. So then you set sail. You're off to East Alencia.
Gadwin gives you his boat.
Yep. And you, of course, run into those evil mermaids. And, what's interesting about it is that, like, they knew that it was a dangerous spot. And so the mermaids are like, hey, you need to come help us. We need help. And Justin's like, oh, we'll help you. And Fina's like, well, this sounds like something that we shouldn't do. This seems fishy to me.
Weren't we warned about this?
Yeah. And then he does it anyway.
I love the mermaid portraits, by the way. They're all sparkly with like the wavy blue hair.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way that they're presented in general, and I like how stupid Justin's reaction to it is. I mean, like he's just so like starstruck, and it's the first time in the whole game really you've seen him become starstruck about women in general. And I like that Fina's the one who's like, yeah, you're being a moron right now, dude. She's not jealous; she's just like, you're stupid. And I love that dynamic of it. And of course, they go up there, and then they try to go trap them. And then they have to defeat the mermaids, and then afterwards, Fina is surprisingly nice about it.
Yes, she's way nicer than she needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's actually like really where you see a scene after that where they kind of have a real heart-to-heart, where Justin starts to acknowledge, all right, maybe I have a thing for you. And Fina's pushing hard. She doesn't say it outright in that conversation, but she is pushing hard, which I love.
Yeah.
It's a really, really sweet moment too. It's not quite as sweet as the light moment on the dock, but it's a really cool moment too, I think.
It is. You can see they're kind of working through things. You can see their process, I think, with that scene. And you can see Justin, again, I mentioned this last time around, but he made a pretty big mistake. And you can see him processing that too.
Right.
And learning from it.
And I think that's important to his maturity and sort of his growth throughout the course of the game too. So once you arrive in East Alencia, you are pretty much accosted immediately once again. So you get to a new continent. And then something sort of bad happens almost immediately by this group from Cafu Village, led by a guy named Rapp, who is convinced that you are one of the people who is hurting his people. And eventually you have to save one of the people who is in sort of his one of the villagers for Rapp. You end up saving one of them. And he becomes convinced that you are maybe not part of the bad guys. And, to me, I was pretty clear at that point already. Like, all right, these bad guys he's talking about, they must be the Garlisle forces because somehow they're everywhere. Like, it's just like this tiny private army that somehow, like, literally has, like, footholds in every element of the world. I just really want to know who's bankrolling the Garlisle forces. Like, where's all this money coming from? Because they don't have taxes. They're a private army. So where's all this money coming from?
Right. How did General Baal... I don't know. It's true. They are completely... Like, they're never associated with a place. I know we may have mentioned that, but yeah, they're not associated with a particular place. And you know that they recruit people from all over because occasionally you'll talk to a soldier and they'll mention that they're from Parm or New Parm or something.
Right. And it's amazing, like, sort of the grip on information they seem to have, too, because, like, everybody else in the world thinks, like, this is the end of the world. This is not. They don't know what's across the sea. They don't know what's here or there anywhere. Right. These people know it all, and it's like it doesn't seem like they're so much more advanced than the rest of the world. And where did all this technology come from? You don't see this kind of technology literally anywhere else in the rest of the world. I just don't understand it.
They have planes. They're all the way over in East Alencia, when most people think the wall is the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fourth distinct area that is totally separate from any other area. And somehow they're everywhere. It's one of those things that, as I'm playing it, I'm just like thinking, I don't understand how you guys are everywhere. But yeah, I mean, and really the technology element is funny to me too.
Yeah. I think my brain filled in the gaps and just assumed that maybe they found some really valuable Ikarian treasure, Ikarian technology.
That would make sense.
I don't know.
That would make sense. But you save someone from his village, and Rapp says, okay, you're a cool dude now. And he tries to take you back to Cafu Village. In Cafu Village, they don't like outsiders. And the reason they don't like outsiders is, as we were just talking about, a lot of people from their village were petrified. They're all turned to stone. And so outsiders are someone they don't really trust. They have a real issue with another tribe, which we'll talk a little bit more about, from Lane Village.
And once again, they kind of think they've like lost the goodwill of the spirits.
Right, which is what everyone thinks here. So Rapp says, well, that's nonsense. I'm going to go off with you guys. And so then we get a new party member. We get Rapp, which I wish I was more excited about, because Rapp is okay. I don't really know what his strengths in battle are. I just gave him earth spells and just had him cast earth spells over and over again. And he had like one skill that was okay, but yeah.
I'd say he's your fast party member. He starts with projectiles. He can also use knives. He's a decent caster.
But Fina was faster than him the whole time for me, but maybe it's just the way that I built Fina. But Fina was always...
That's true.
Her meter was moving way faster than his all the time. I mean, it was nice to have another, like, damage sponge and someone to occasionally heal. But he doesn't come with... He only comes with 2 magic spells, 2 magic things unlocked, and you have to find 2 more mana eggs to make him more useful. And his magic is not very developed when you get him either. So he just always fell behind for me. And especially compared to the real the final fourth party member, or even one of the ones we get from Lane Village in a moment here, he just is never nearly as useful to me. He was just always playing support, and he was dead half the time, and I didn't even revive him when he was, because he just didn't do that much in battle for me. Yeah, I mean, he's not one of my favorite characters either. I mean, he's just sort of like your standard, like, I don't know, young... like daughter or son of the village elder, and he's not going to do what you say, and he's got a slightly sharp mouth, and that's
I'm going against your traditions.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Rapp is maybe the least interesting party member we get here. And that's amazing because there's like a little girl party member in this, and usually I find those particular characters to be really poorly characterized in video games. But no, I think Rapp is the one. Rapp is the one who I think is not. I mean, he's not funny. Usually, those characters are funny. He's not funny.
Sue is funny.
Yeah, Sue is funny. Sue's amazing. Oh well. At that point, Rapp decides to take you to the Tower of Doom, which is where the people who have petrified his parents are located, he thinks, and also a large portion of his village. They believe that it's because of something that they've done, right?
Yeah, I mean, they believe it's because they've allowed outsiders and they become too lenient. I think there's a moment I liked with Justin and Rapp, because you have to go through the petrified forest to get to the tower, and they stop at his parents' stones, and Rapp has buffed them, so they're completely, like, round.
Yeah, and the part that bothers me about that is what if they become unpetrified? Then
I don't know.
How are they going to be reanimated if they're just this round thing?
Do they just reform? Yeah. I hope so. But they have a moment of Justin saying, let's go to the tower and stop this right now. So they do.
And of course, you run into the Garlisle forces here, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it's their tower. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And you also run into your next visitor party member, who I like a lot.
Oh, Milda's great.
Milda's
amazing, and she hits so hard, and her personality is so big, and so, I mean, Milda is great. She plays like sort of the tropey, like, very strong woman type who doesn't like seem like, very intellectual or whatever, but I don't care. She's just delightful. Her relationship with her husband, who we'll meet later, is just really beautiful, and funny and amusing. And man, she hits like a truck. And that's the part I like best.
And she is from the neighboring village of Lane, which you find out Cafu village has a beef with Lane. And so the two of them are bickering, and you actually have to fight her at first right outside this Doom Tower, which doesn't seem very practical. But then after the fight, you take her to a storehouse, keep her safe. And she starts to go, wait a minute. Like, you didn't leave me for them to find me, so maybe you're not all bad. And that's sort of the turning point where she and Rapp and everyone kind of realize they have the common goal of taking down the Garlisle forces who have been causing trouble, and you proceed through the dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and one of the things that happens after you finish that dungeon is you go back to Cafu. And they say, no, well, we'll accept these two new ones now, but we can't have Milda. And, I like the way that, this game deals with people who are on opposite sides of conflicts, so consistently well. I mean, outside of Baal, who is just like a force of evil, everybody else in this game, to some degree, has good intentions. Like, you really don't meet many truly evil people throughout the course of this game, and it just shows the ways in which conflicts build from misunderstanding, which is one of my favorite like sort of storytelling devices. It's one of I love Suikoden for that reason, and I think that Grandia, in a very different way, seems to really have that philosophy driving a lot of what's happening in the plot.
Definitely, and just to backtrack for a quick minute. At the end of the tower, you do find out something kind of interesting and important. You find out that the Garlisle forces have been cultivating this weird, evil plant force called Gaia, and that's what's kind of been corrupting things in the area. And you take a sprout, and you were going to take it back to Cafu, but you get stopped. And I think it's Lean that stops you, right?
I believe so.
Takes the sprout back.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the one who stops you, which again goes back to that idea of Lean sort of being all over the place with the way things go. But I mean, I think that she, again, her arc is so interesting, and it's still a believable moment, despite the fact that she literally just gave you the Spirit Stone back, like 3 dungeons ago, because she is so conflicted. But yeah, I mean, Gaia is an interesting sort of villain. You don't find out much about him at this point, except for that he's just like sort of this like giant, like, I don't know, brain squid looking thing. It's pretty gross. And you don't really get a feel for what it's there for or what its purpose is, but it sort of turns out that this is sort of the ultimate evil that you end up fighting against. So I have sort of a thing against Gaia because I think that he overwhelms the plot in a way that hurts it. But I will say that in terms of gross factor, Gaia's definitely got it going on.
Yeah, agreed. I would say like it's not a bad introduction overall to, the ultimate evil of the plot. Yeah, definitely Gaia kind of ends up being an overwhelming force. But I kind of like how it's a slower step in the process of, something evil is going on with the Garlisle forces. The game opens with them having some sort of nondescript plan. And I like the way that with this scene, they're handing you a little bit, a snippet of it, kind of giving you a glimpse first instead of just suddenly it's overwhelming.
Right. They don't Final Fantasy it, we're just like, here's the real evil force behind it all at the end. And I like that it's having a real impact on people around you. My problem with the way Gaia is presented is that it sort of it overwhelms the plot in such a way that it sort of loses the rhythm of the game. Like I feel like it loses its spirit because it's just all about Baal and Gaia and Baal and Gaia. And you don't really know at this point the degree to which Gaia is such an important and destructive force. So if it had just stayed, I think, as this thing that just sort of ruins people's lives in these individual villages, and then you're going through and saving them or moving things in the right direction in a different way, that to me would have felt good. But
it would have been more consistent.
Yeah. But it is that overwhelming sort of darkness that Gaia brings to the tone that, for me, hurts it a little bit.
I can see that.
So it is at this point that we decide, after we are kicked out of Kefu village, basically, because Rapp says, I'm still not doing this, that you tell Milda what your goal is, which is to get to Alent. And she says, oh, well, you should go talk to the 3 wise men in my village of Lane because they know the way to Alent. And coincidence, of course. But then you make your way to Alent. And you have a couple of stopovers on the way there. You make a stop in Zilpadon, where Guido is from. And I can't remember, does anything super significant happen in Zilpadon the first time you stop there? I don't think so.
I'm trying to remember. It's, I think, noteworthy is it's kind of like a cross section. It's in the middle of the desert, and you see refugees from some different areas coming together. So kind of building up toward that like overwhelming evil of Gaia. You can see that like lots of terrible things are happening to individual villages, individual people. Many of groups are headed for Zilpadon. And other than running into Guido again, who he's the elder, right? If I'm remembering correctly, like he has a significant role in the village.
Yeah. Is he the elder of Zilpadon?
I think so.
Yeah. So it's really strange that he's traveling the world while he's the elder. Even when I think I knew that, I found that a little bit confusing. I'm like, how are you literally all over the world? Because he's been helping you sort of along the way. And I think we forgot to mention that you see him when you're leaving, when you first arrive on this continent, and he tells you some more things about Alent, and then he lets you stay in his tent, but then he charges you $100 for it. And it sort of fits as you find out that he sort of runs the Moge. The Moge sort of have a sort of tradesman culture where they're sort of moving goods back and forth, and so that matches who he is. But it's sort of funny.
It is, especially he really kind of sets you up before he charges you in the morning. It kind of sets you up for like, oh, okay, this is a mysterious guidance scene, and maybe I'll see him again, and why is he helping me? And then the next morning, he's just sort of like, oh, okay. I guess he wanted the money a little bit. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is funny. I agree. So after you leave Zilpadon, you move through a couple of additional dungeons. And we haven't really talked about this, but in order to get to Zilpadon, you have to go through a desert. And then when you leave there, you go through a desert. And then you go through the plateau. I mean, there are one of the things, and listeners, you've probably noticed that we're having a hard time sometimes keeping track of what's happening at any given moment. And it's because The dungeons all look the same. They all feel the same. You're going through the same sorts of things. And that's not a criticism of the game in general necessarily, but it does make it feel like it's hard to keep track of what happens where, even when I'm literally looking at it in front of my face.
And I feel like that's not so much the case with the towns and even the dungeons sometimes, but those areas that you have to traverse to get to and from dungeons or to and from towns, like the plains, the forests, the deserts, the plateaus. They really do kind of blend.
Yeah. And, a lot of times they're not too terribly difficult to navigate, so which is probably why I don't have too much of a problem with it. They're much easier to navigate than the dungeons are, and even sometimes the towns, to be honest with you. They definitely have a sort of flavor of blandness and sameness, which I think sometimes makes it difficult to distinguish, because as I'm thinking about how you move from these places, I'm just like, don't you just go through like dungeon after dungeon? The nice part, though, is that, again, at least when you get in fights, you're using the Grandia battle system, which is still a delight here. So that's always good.
Yes.
So once you get to Lane Village, you meet, first of all, one of my favorite scenes in the whole game. It turns out that one of the village elders is, and I'm not sure how to describe his species. How would you describe the species of Milda's husband? Giant, I don't know.
Oh man, kind of like mythological bull creature, maybe.
Yeah, but he also looks kind of like a sea creature. He's like more bulbous than a bull. I don't know. He looks real weird and real goofy. And Milda is really, really serious and very tough. And she is desperately in love with this village elder who she calls Darlin, because his name is actually Darlin, which seems like it might be cute on the nose, but it is totally adorable in this game.
Yeah, as silly as it is, seeing them together it's pretty joyful and fun to watch.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's so surprising too. We're still in the section of the game where I thought it was still maintaining that spirit of optimism at this point, and I thought that it did a great job with that here. So when you're in Lane Village, it turns out you have to go talk to the 3 village elders, and they will tell you, here's how you get to Alent. So you talk to Darlin, and he's like, okay, he tells you some information about Angelou and how it's an ancient civilization, and that Alent is related to the Icarians in some way, but he's not super hyper-specific about it. And then he says, okay, now I'm going to send you to Durlin, which is the name of the other village elder. And he's the one who really knows how to get into Alent.
Right, so it's kind of a collective effort between the 3 wise men to figure out the complete picture of how to get there.
Yeah. And then Durlin tells you some information about it again, where he tells you that it's like this, important thing. But then my favorite conversation is you have to go talk to a guy named Dorlin, who says like, yeah, you can go talk to Dorlin, but he's not really himself right now. And you go talk to him, and he forgets everything during the conversation, like every time you talk to him. Like the conversations you had with Dorlin, I thought were amazing. And I love that they're Darlin, Durlin, and Dorlin. It's so goofy that, like I said, it fits with this game perfectly.
It's a nice touch. It is.
But then it turns out that you have to go find Dorlin's horn in the abandoned Lane Village.
Again, area that's been corrupted. This time it's really weird, like warped reality kind of is how I would describe it. So there's teleporting and... Oh, man.
I'd sort of forgotten until you just told me about this, and I said the dungeon design. I think maybe before we started recording, I said the dungeon design got better in the second half, and now I just remembered that I lied. Because, oh my gosh, I hated this dungeon. I got lost so many times with all the different teleporters, and I think I spent an hour in this dungeon. Without any exaggeration, and it was incredibly frustrating. Like the different types of realities you're walking through, and there's like these houses that are in the abandoned village. You can't really figure out where they go, and it is Grandia dungeon design at its absolute worst. I mean, it's clever. I'll give it that. It's not just confusing; it's cleverly confusing. So there's that, I guess.
I had to attempt it in a few different sittings. I will admit that. Yeah. And I think depending on my mood, I kind of fluctuated between, all right, I'm okay with, this being cleverly confused and then just being frustrated.
Yeah, I think I was just frustrated. I'm certain I was. And I'm certain I was playing on the Switch, thank God, because I was able to hit suspend about every 5 minutes after I got really angry so that I did not throw my Switch, because I was playing it in handheld and it did not get broken. Maybe not the right idea when you're going through a Grandia dungeon. But you do get the horn in the abandoned lane village. And then you go back, and you give the horn to Dorlin, and he is back to himself again. And he tells you that you need he gives you the Medal of Knowledge, right? Or does he tell you to go get the Medal of Knowledge?
There's more information about it in Zilpadan. It's in a temple, of course. So you have to go to yet another temple to get the medal, which you need to get passage
to Alent, right?
Yep.
So then you go back off to Zilpadan. You meet with Guido there, and he tells you how to get in. And I found it really confusing because you have to drain the fountain in the middle of Zilpadan to get into it. But then somehow I couldn't figure out how to get down the stairs into the fountain. I think it took me 10 minutes to figure out how to get down the stairs into the fountain this time.
I remember being a little confused at that point too, but also just I kind of appreciate the fact that they had these ruins, this dungeon kind of in the middle of one of the towns, because that's not something you saw all that often in this era of RPG.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I hadn't really thought about that before. Something I sort of take for granted nowadays, I think, that there's like some underground dungeon that you have to go through. Whereas here, it's not a given. That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that before. But the Zil ruins are really long. They're one of the longer dungeons in this game, if I remember correctly. And some pretty eventful things happen. This is really where the plot starts to pick up, because you're on your way to Alent, and they are trying to keep you away from getting there. As you're going down into the ruins to get the medal. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention that Guido actually joins your party here because Milda, and I apologize, Milda decides to stay back in lane. She doesn't come along with you, which is really, really depressing, because what makes it even more depressing is that Guido joins your party. And I know I've complained a lot about Rapp and Sue not being useful in battle, but man, Guido doesn't do a whole lot of anything. He doesn't start with many skills. You don't have him for very long. I don't think you can even give him mana eggs, right? I don't think so. I don't think he has any magic. Unless I'm misremembering. Probably the right call. Because he's not in your party for very long. But because it's such a long dungeon, like I remember having him for a long time, I think.
Yeah, it felt like a long time.
And so it's frustrating to go through that dungeon. But as you go through that dungeon, and once you get the medal, at the bottom of the Zil ruins, Fina's captured. And it's because Baal is finally deciding to sort of come out of his den and sort of take a more active role in this. And so he takes her onto his ship, the Grandeur. And the Grandeur is one of the more memorable dungeons for me in lots of different ways. It's a pretty long dungeon because you have to find your way through it in order to go save Fina. But
I remember being so impatient at that point.
I was just like, I was just done. But it's also at that point that you have to fight Saki, Mio, and Nana. I'm sorry, all the names. All the names. You have to fight all three of them as you're going through this. And this, to me, is the most challenging battle in the entire game.
It's rough.
Because they all hit really hard. One of them inflicts status effects. They have like lots of area effect attacks. And if all three of them are alive, they do a thing called a Trinity attack, which I feel like they do like all the time. If you leave all three of them alive, they spam Trinity attack, which seems very.
Yeah, I was surprised how often they were able to do that, and it's that plus all the little things that made them annoying when you fought them individually, like the status effects.
Right, and you put all three of them together, and you just don't have the party member power that you've had earlier either, and I died on this fight maybe 4 or 5 times, and it wasn't like I didn't pause to occasionally grind up some skills, even though I was in a hurry when I played it. And really that fight just came down to luck. Was I able to take one of them down quickly enough in order to do it? And I did like that it sort of forced me to engage with the strategy of Grandia in a way that lots of fights don't, which is it was so much about trying to delay their attacks. Because if I could keep that Trinity attack back, I was able to engage with the fight more effectively. But Eventually they're going to hit you anyway, but if you can keep them from attacking you and eventually manage to take down just one of the sisters and still have, like, everybody standing, then you're golden. But the hard part is having everyone standing at the end of that fight.
It was, and yeah, I mean, I think my strategy was just countering them and canceling them as much as I could so that to delay that combined attack.
I was really bad at canceling in this game. I feel like there is such a limited period of time where, because you have to use the critical attack as opposed to the double hit attack to cancel, and the critical attack takes a little bit longer. And so because it takes a little bit longer, I felt like I was frequently not getting my hit in, which is actually something that changes a lot in Grandia too, having played that really recently. You have a much longer cancel window, so canceling becomes like essential in Grandia too, because it's a little bit harder actually, and if you don't cancel attacks, you will die very quickly. Whereas here, it's more about delaying attacks, I think.
You can manage, yeah.
Yeah, and so then you get to the top. Once you get to the top of the grandeur, and I apologize, listeners, we forgot to mention a really important detail that happened a little while ago here back in the city of Cafu, because when you go back to Cafu from the Tower of Doom, it's actually under attack by the Garlisle forces, and it is under attack by like different versions of Gaia. And while you're there, during the conflict, Lean is there, and you discover that Lean is in fact an Icarian, which is one of what you believe at this point is part of some like sort of. I think at this point we believe that they're sort of an ancient race, right? We don't have a clear idea at this point of who they are.
They're associated with Angelou, and
which means that she has extra magic powers and she has wings and she can fly and she is like a huge part of all the mythology of this world, which is very confusing to Fina when she sees it, because she's like, "Hey, how are you an Icarian? Because we're sisters. That's weird. How is that a thing?" So anyway, fast forward back to the grandeur. So once the grandeur starts going down, we then realize, because Fina has to save Justin, she sprouts some wings as well, and she saves Justin. And so we realize at that moment that Fina is also a member, which you discover is important later. And I guess we can jump ahead a little bit here to explain who they are. So it turns out that the Icarians are these two twin sisters who are born when Gaia comes out, because Gaia is this overwhelming force that is going to try to destroy the world, and then the Icarian sisters have to sacrifice themselves in order to keep Gaia at bay for a little bit longer, until humans become so selfish that they will go seek out Gaia to then use his powers to destroy the world again, which becomes clarified later with some statues and things like that, and Baal realizing that Icarians are always twins.
Yes.
Anyway, so I actually think that the plot out of the way, I think that's a pretty effective moment. I was surprised by it. I was not expecting her to be an Icarian the first time I played it. Even the second time I played it, I didn't remember. I think that the way they play with Fina's characterization in terms of being an Icarian doesn't feel cheap, and it feels like it ends up blending pretty well to me. She, at this point, though, because she's an Icarian, ends up getting, like, kidnapped so frequently that I get a little tired of, like, constantly having to have Justin like chase Fina, but I thought that was mostly handled pretty well.
Yeah, agreed. I think you got right to the core of it. I'm a little bit conflicted. Like, I had a feeling, but I wasn't entirely. I was still surprised. I think it was an effective way of delivering the information, and a pretty emotionally evocative one. Like she's doing it to save Justin, who she cares deeply about, which is great. And at least I can understand the Garlisle forces needing her at that point, but it still is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I mean,
her getting kidnapped.
Yeah,
frequently.
Yeah, I don't like that as like sort of the narrative device. I don't like losing Fina for my party, because she's my like essential healer at this point, and she moves way faster than everyone. So please stop taking one of my best characters away from me.
At least she's one of your best characters,
right? But it ends up taking away some of her agency. I think like you make her like this all powerful thing. But I feel like she ends up becoming
but she's both. She is a tool.
Yeah, she's less interesting though. I mean, like I feel like her conflict is happening in a way that feels less true to me than the way Lean's conflict ends up happening, because it feels like she just like sort of shifts gears a lot faster, and like she ends up saying things later like, "Oh, this is just something I have to do." I'm like, I haven't seen enough to make me buy that you believe that. You've been by Justin's side every time. You guys have made everything work out. And now you're just going to, like, continue to say I've got to do it this way. I don't know. I didn't buy it, but I do.
Now you're being resigned. Yeah.
I do like this moment though. The moment you find out she's an Ikarian, I think is cool. But luckily, once you guys land from the Grandeur, or land, I mean, I guess once the Grandeur crashes and you land because Fina, you finally get to go to Alent. They basically say like, this is all just sort of a test. Like, we've always known where Alent is. It's out back. You just have to go up that mountain over there, and then you're good, which I think is really funny. But it turns out that Alent is literally right behind Lane Village. And you go up this rainbow bridge, and then it turns out that Alent is like sort of almost like this space station, I think. It seems to be. Is my read correct on that?
That's how it looked to me. It's a really interesting design, too.
Yeah. It looks sort of like vaguely science fiction-y, but it's also got some weird fantasy elements in it. The design is very strange to me. I'm not really sure what they were going for with it, except for like mystical, magical, technological. Like, it's all those things together here, and like, oh, it's in space because of course it's in space.
Yeah, now that you mention it, that's just kind of. I felt that way all along about most of the Alent-related / Ikarian-related relics, and I felt that way ever since we saw that statue in the museum that Justin broke. Right. Honestly, like, there's this weird fusion of like futuristic and fantasy, and some of it's kind of jarring, and even the characters make comments about it sometimes as well. Like, yeah, there are these giant eyes everywhere in their architecture and in their art.
Yeah, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any sort of like a consistency of vision. I mean, it's all kind of weird and cool, so I guess I'll take it. But when you get to Alent, and this is sort of where the plot dump happens, of course, because Alent is Alent. But it's not nearly as like, magical or amazing as you would think it would be, since it's being the space station in the sky, because there's really no one there. You think you're going to probably run into like this ancient civilization, but it's really just Liet and lots of copies of Liet. Who info dump lots of things on you, who tell you, okay, Gaia's been around forever, and the Angelou civilization was destroyed by Gaia because they became too greedy, and humans continue to destroy, and then the Ikarians are the ones who continually have to be reborn and to save us over and over and over and over again. And one of the versions of Liet that you run into says some like really weird slang thing. I can't remember exactly what she says, but it's really weird. She's like, oh, I hear this is how humans speak on Earth, which then is not the way that Liet herself is characterized later, which is a little bit weird, but whatever.
And it's weird that she refers to it as Earth too. I always get a kick of when RPGs do that.
Yeah, like, well, this isn't Earth. Trust me. Our continents do not look like this. We do not have mermaids, which I'm very disappointed about. Yeah, but once you actually meet Liet, she says, we every new Liet, they're reborn, and every new Liet has a tablet, and if it's red red is good, right? And if it's blue, it means it's sad. And
they're sad, yes.
She thinks hers will be sad because the world's about to be destroyed, so that would certainly make, I think, someone who's looking over the Earth and trying to protect it pretty sad. So then she actually decides to join you. Liet, awesome.
I always kind of, I don't know, I thought that was such an interesting motivation for her. Just like, I don't want my tablet to be like this. I want to have an active role and make sure my tablet is red.
Yeah, it's always like, I'm confused, like, why didn't you do that earlier? Like, it doesn't take much convincing. Like, they talk for 3 minutes, and then she's like, all right, I'll go down with you guys. Cool.
I mean, thank you, but...
Yeah. Thank you, because you have all the magic. All the magic. She's so useful in battle, especially in random battles. I mean, I feel like she was cleaning up mobs for me, just like left and right. Really
all the easily. Lower power, all the lower power mobs.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't really have much of a personality, pretty much throughout the rest of the game, but I don't care. Because her ability to use magic and her lightning magic, her zap magic is already there. And zap magic is very powerful in this game.
Doesn't she have like a special set of spells?
She does, yeah. And so does Fina at this point too. Once you find out that she's an Ikarian, she, if you have the right skill sets, can get these very high magic output spells like End of the World and Yggdrasil.
They all have cool names.
Yeah. So she has high-end spells. Liet has high-end spells. So I think both of them are almost equally useful. I mean, Fina's still much faster, but Liet's a little bit more powerful.
I didn't pick up on this or think about it quite as much a long time ago when I played the game, but Liet's role and the Lean and Fina's are actually pretty similar. They're they're reborn and they have this very clear role. Yeah. And Liette decides to break out of hers, and we'll get to what happens with Lean and Vina.
Yeah, just a moment.
But it's kind of interesting how similar their stories are, now that I'm thinking about it.
That's true. Yeah, sort of this idea of both of them. Yeah, I've never really thought about that before. It's an interesting idea. I like that, yeah. But if I'm not mistaken, you guys actually, you fall from Alent in a very sort of frightening moment, and everyone's like screaming and like, what is happening? And I if you're literally falling through space, I can imagine I would be scared too. And then you fall down to the Luzette Mountains, and then you end up going to a base of the Garlisle forces. And this time, you're not a bad guy anymore, right?
Yeah, you go in there with the expectation that Baal might still be there. You might not be welcomed, but it turns out that Mullen and Lean are mutinying, basically.
Right. So, and it's a surprising moment that they're doing it at this point, because I think he realizes that if he gets a Spirit Stone, that Baal is going to try to destroy the world. So they start mutinying against Baal, and they actually sort of show you the way to go chase after him into these underground railway ruins, which I don't really remember the dungeon very well for these ruins, but the boss is probably, I think, the second hardest in the game here too. Because you fight Baal, and Baal this time, you fought him previously, and he's kind of a pushover, but this time he like sort of fuses with Gaia, and he has like these long, like tentacly arms, and he can like hit you like in 5 different ways with status effects and area of effect things. It's not quite as hard, I thought, as the fight we talked about earlier.
I definitely got through it. It was not easy, but I got through it faster than the 3 lieutenants.
Yeah, I agree with you. He escapes, and this is when things really hit the fan.
Yep, he completes his fusion.
Yeah, and then it becomes sort of an international threat, something you have to take care of at some point. You end up going on to another ship for the Garlisle forces, the Lion Lot, and there is a huge argument about how you're going to deal with this threat. I think this is probably the sequence on the ship, and then when there is the attack on Zilpidon, where I think it's one of the most effective sort of sequences in the game for this section. It's very like sort of end of the world, and everyone's sort of arguing like, how is it we need to take care of it, because how are we going to break this cycle of the Icarians constantly having to sacrifice themselves? Mullen's answer is force, force, force. That's Lean's answer. That's even Fina's answer at some point as well. But it doesn't end up being the final answer here. What did you think of that whole sequence?
I thought it was pretty intense. Honestly, I was very, very invested in it. Especially the way they only have that limited, when Zilpidon's under attack. First off, you get hit with the realization that you're working with most of the Garlisle forces as you knew them. But then right after that, you're kind of limited in the area that you can go to. I think only the Savannah and Zilpidon are selectable, and you go there and it's immediately attacked, and there's a series where you have to do a lot of what you've been doing all along and save people from enemies. And Lean will like lead you along a little bit through there, but I think it's really effective in getting the point across that something's got to change, because it's not sustainable. Kind of what you've been doing. As much as I love the tone of the first half in the game, you really it drives the point home that that's not really a sustainable way to deal with this threat anymore, that it's kind of overwhelming.
Right. But I think that the way that they come to the decision about what needs to happen, and the power that Fina has, and Lean, and how they come to it is a little bit forced and a little bit cheesy. Like, you sort of know what's going to happen here. You know that you're not going to fire off these cannons. And in order to make sure that Fina and Justin have the opportunity to be the ones to then go try to find Gaia and be the one to take him down, this is where Lean makes a decision and says, Fina, no, you're actually more powerful as an Icarian than me because you have belief. And like, if you said it some other way, I might find it less cheesy. Lean has to sacrifice herself. And, when Lean sacrifices herself, I think that it is, it's a really beautiful moment in terms of like giving you that idea of how important the bond between the two sisters is here. And also the significance of the bond between Justin and Fina. So I think that's a really, really powerful moment personally.
It is an incredibly powerful moment. Like, just the way she addresses everyone, and if I'm not mistaken, she kind of takes over the communication system, and she doesn't.
She's like,
and she doesn't
on all the TVs.
She doesn't give the others very much of a choice. It's an interesting moment for her and Justin too, because she kind of claims that he's shown her a different way of looking at things, and that's part of why she has to do this. And she believes that he'll figure out how to break this cycle.
Right, and he sort of does. There's a sequence where after this happens, of course, everybody is devastated that Lean has sacrificed herself. Mullen's really upset, but I like that there's a little bit of a change in heart in Mullen, sort of recognizing that sacrifice. It's right after that Lean makes the sacrifice that he has sort of a change in heart. So after Lean makes her sacrifice, Fina ends up sort of thinking that she has to take on the role of taking down Gaia, and Mullen has a conversation with Fina about that and gets her to go on to the ship with her.
It's a really tense moment because she talks to Mullen, she talks to Justin. Justin's insisting to Mullen and Fina that there's a different way to do this. Like, Fina certainly doesn't have to sacrifice herself, but he can't explain what that is.
Yeah, and it's at this moment that Justin's at his lowest. He thinks he's just going to give up. Like, oh, Fina's gone. I can't do this without Fina. I'm all done. And Rapp, in one of the few moments that I actually will give him some props for, he says, like, you're a jerk. I don't want to do this with you. You're the worst. And even Liette's like, yeah, I don't know who you are. I don't know why you were the person who was chosen to be able to come to Alent if you can't do this. And so they all sort of give him a talking to. And it's actually Guido, if I'm not mistaken, right, who is the one who sort of breaks him of his inability to move forward.
Because they're really, really not sure what to do. And I remember him going to Guido and Guido saying, well, in order to save the most important thing to you, which is Fina, in this case, you need to draw on all your resources and work with everyone.
Right.
And go do it.
Yeah, and you have to go figure it out. And that's when he's told about the spirit sword, and the Angelou civilization and the spirits in general call on him. It's at that moment when he makes the decision that he's going to move forward. They call on him and they say, okay, we're going to take you to the spirit sanctuary now. And that's where he gets the spirit sword, which is a really, really powerful weapon. I was kind of rolling with axes before this, but once I got the spirit sword, I was using that spirit sword for the remainder of the game, which is not very long.
No.
But it's a really super powerful weapon. And I think that I like that there is at least one moment of doubt with Justin, too. It feels realistic. Consistently, when Fina is taken away from you over and over and over again, and then Fina gives up, too. I think I would have given up if I was him, too. I'm less likely to believe that Fina would have given up than him, because I feel like after your sister makes that sacrifice, it seems strange to me. But Justin giving up, I understand.
Yeah. I had to do some thinking about that with Fina, too. It was kind of an interesting exercise in, like, well, if I had a loss like Fina did, would that make me resolve to do things differently, or would I feel like I was dishonoring them if I weren't willing to do the same thing? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, but you go into the J base, you convince her to leave, while Mullen still continues to try to do sort of the fire on Gaia thing. And then you sort of find your way within Gaia, because Gaia has grown to like this being of massive proportions, of course, because JRPGs, that's where these things go. Always. You end up going into Gaia to fight Gaia and take Gaia down. What did you think of the final dungeon, besides it just sort of being very gross?
Oh, it took me a little while to get over that gross out factor. It really, really did.
Yeah, I agree.
It took me a while. I'm not gonna lie. It took me a while to get through. But I felt like it was pretty steady.
Yeah.
Overall.
I didn't have too much trouble with the dungeon. I mean, I got turned around in it a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. There were like these moving areas that were like tendons or something, I guess. I don't know. I thought the random battles were much harder, and so I certainly struggled, and there were a lot fewer save points. Like, you had to fight lots of different versions of Gaia and lots of different bosses, and unlike the rest of this game, where usually in the rest of this game you can just like, when a boss fight's coming because, hey, there's a save point, there's a boss fight in the next room, and the save point also lets you heal all the way. Here, you were having multiple boss fights without having a save point in between. So I found that a little bit challenging, because resource management was not something I had to do before this in this game.
Right. Now that you mention it, I think I did get stuck and had to backtrack a little bit because I didn't manage my resource and I needed some healing items, which I hadn't been using, actually, now that you mention it, very much at all, because you can recover at the save points. Like, I just hadn't needed to so much.
And I've been using healing items or healing spells. And so at this point, like I was on the final boss. So eventually you fight like multiple versions of Gaia, of course. And he's not terribly challenging except for the fact that I did not have enough healing items. And I ran out. And I got really lucky. I think it was just Liette who was alive when I finally took the boss down. She just fired off like the last spell of MP she had because all my MP was out, all my HP was out.
Right.
And I don't think it would have been too much of a problem if I had pulled the items out appropriately and sort of known what was coming. So it felt like sort of out of line with the rest of the game. I didn't have a huge problem with it because I did like being challenged in a different way. But I certainly found it to be a challenge.
Right, and it required a bit of a shift near the end game, I would say, with the slew of bosses and increase in difficulty of enemies. I hadn't had to think too much about what was in my inventory, just making sure I had something there and that everyone was decently equipped.
Yeah, Battle of Attrition had not been the way this game had gone. It had been like, who acts first? So you got to slow this person down. And if you manage to do it, you'll have the healing and you'll have the things to make the fight work. But with these ones, we had multiple parts that had 9,999 HP and all these other things. And so it was just, again, resource management had not been what the game was. But again, like I said, I liked it. It was different. It was unique.
Yeah.
I thought the battle was fair. It wasn't quite as difficult as some of the previous ones, but I had more trouble because I just didn't have the stuff for it.
Yeah, I think I had to go back and I leveled up some healing magic a little bit. I wasn't quite there.
No, and that makes sense. It totally makes sense to me. After you defeat Gaia, the world is saved. Everybody loves you. And everything's over. Yay. So the ending is pretty normal, except I love the very final sequence, which is where it's 10 years later, and it's being narrated by Sue. And she says, for the first time, Justin and Fina are returning. And I'll admit that I actually maybe got a little bit emotional here at this ending. Because then Justin and Fina are married. They've been adventuring around the world for 10 years. They have all these children. And when the children come off of the boat, they both look just like miniature versions of Justin and Fina. It's so very cute. And Sue is grown up and she sounds more mature. And you can see what she looks like. And I like that you get to follow her. And it's in Parm, sort of back where you started.
She kind of gets to welcome you back and she gets to be the...
Yeah, and I love that it acknowledges her importance in the narrative. But you also don't get to see Justin or Fina at the end there. Which I think is sort of a nice touch, actually. Leaving you with that ambiguity.
So I wanted to back it up just a little bit because playing off this idea that Justin, Lean believes Justin is the one with the potential to figure out a new way.
Yeah.
What ends up happening in that, the world is saved moment, how it happens is Justin ends up using that spirit sword to destroy the spirit stone. Mm-hmm. To kind of prevent that greed, prevent that cycle, prevent Gaia from coming back. And then Gaia takes on a different form because Justin did that. It's a non-threatening tree, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that is correct.
Really cool looking giant tree. And Fina points out that you can kind of see all that spirit energy that all the different villagers were concerned about returning to the land, which is cool.
I thought that was a nice moment, and it makes sense. It was not what I was expecting, this idea that the spirit stones themselves were the things that needed to go away in order to make this all work. It was, it didn't feel too cheap to me or too obvious. I can see why nobody would have figured that out before. It seems like a strange thing. How is it that that's the thing? But yeah, no, I liked that moment a lot. But that's the end of the narrative. I think the ending is the most effective part of the last 10 hours. Because it feels like it captures that optimism a little bit. But yeah, I like the ending a lot.
I do too. I think narratively things stay pretty well in line tone-wise up until Melda leaves, maybe a little bit before that. You still get kind of flashes of that spirit of adventure. And then the ending, I agree with what you said with Sue narrating and everything. That really does kind of tie everything together and bring it back.
One thing we haven't talked about much in this game, though, sort of now that we're done with the narrative, is side quests. And I think the reason for that is that there aren't very many of them. This
No.
isn't quite as linear as Grandia 2, which is even more linear than this game. There's, like, I think one bonus dungeon in Grandia 2. But here there are 3. I will admit, I played this game for review, and I did not have time, as I was playing it for review, this 45, 50-hour game, to mess around with any of the dungeons. But, Hilary, I think you played around with them a little bit, right?
I was able to, kind of poke my head in. I wanted to look around for some of those. Because there are so few of them, I mean, that's really kind of the major motivation to go to any of them.
Right. Well, I've watched some videos, and there's certainly more of a challenge, but there's also cutoff points for them as well. So if you haven't played this game, which you probably shouldn't be listening to this at this point if you haven't, but there are weird cutoff points, and so you can't do 2 of them after a certain point, and then the final dungeon, or the final optional dungeon, which opens up a little bit later, you also can't do at the very end of the game either. Which seems like sort of a strange choice to me, because they're like sort of these hidden dungeons sort of off in like the desert, and they're not super obvious. And I knew that they were there because when I first played this game, I was a completionist and I played them, but I did not like stumble upon any of the optional dungeons. If I had, maybe I would have like played around them a little bit, but because I get so tired of getting lost in this game, it wasn't even worth me trying to like find where it was. So that's sort of a strange choice to me, that you put these big, massive dungeons that are optional in like sort of not easy to locate areas.
Yeah, and honestly, all 3 of them are pretty big.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last one, like, I think it's by far the largest dungeon in the game, which I don't even know what to say about that. When you say that, it does not make me want to play it.
I know. At all. And I think a little, like, tidbit that I picked up while I was kind of looking around and looking into these dungeons is that there's some interesting stuff hidden in some of them, because the Castle of Dreams, which I think is generally considered the easiest of the 3 of them, it's one of the ones in the desert. It actually has the most assets in terms of like battle backgrounds of any location in the game. Yeah.
Spend all that on a spot that you might not see. Probably only 20% of the people who play the game are going to do it. That's really fascinating to me. I mean, I guess it's worth it.
Which is really interesting. And I got through a few of them, and it definitely made me feel better. Like there was a little bit more variety than some of the other dungeons.
Yeah, maybe they could have supplanted some of those dungeons in, like, I don't know, the Lost City of Lane. Oh my gosh, which I never want to think about again. There's not a lot of side content here. I'm curious. So, in terms of your overall thoughts here, what did you think of Grandia overall?
I enjoyed it very, very much overall. There were times, definitely, they were a little bit frustrating. There were some really, really good things, and there were some slightly disappointing things. But overall, my impression is quite positive. I like the characters, which is something that's very, very important to me.
Me too.
Typically. So that's a big thing in its favor. And, you know, there's that tone that we've been talking about that I really, really appreciated for most of it. I do appreciate the battle system a lot because it's easy to navigate, and it's I would say it's actually pretty easy to get through the game quickly without too much extra fuss if you don't really want to experience playing with it and really tweaking your characters and bringing up those skills. But it definitely rewards you.
Absolutely.
Because you can be, like you mentioned before, you can be extremely powerful if you do mess around with it and see what works. So I like that there's that variety and that you can take those different approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it doesn't sit at the top of the PS1 RPG library for me. I'm still putting both Lunar games above this one, even though those aren't PS1 RPGs originally. I'm still putting some of the Final Fantasies above this one. I think that Chrono Cross is maybe slightly stronger. I wouldn't put it at the top, but I would definitely put it as a second tier PS1, Sega Saturn era game. You know, the things that I think really distinguish it, I think this translation, even though I'm guessing that they were probably working with some really, really over-the-top material in those last 10 hours, where the translation seems like it's becoming, like, very cheesy.
Yeah.
Because the narrative, quite frankly, becomes very cheesy. And because they're so clever earlier on, that, to me, like, that really sticks out as being something that distinguishes it, even amongst PS1 RPGs, and the combat. The combat's amazing. But I can't get past the dungeon design. It is so outrageous. Just trying to make the game longer because like PS1 games were long. And so like if we make you get lost in a dungeon for 2 hours, well, now our game's 45 hours long. It's the only reason I can think that they would have made that design choice. And nowadays when we really don't want our RPGs necessarily to always be that long, it feels like a big mistake. And so that hurts the game a lot for me. I think the last 10 hours hurts the game a little bit. But overall, love the characters, love the combat, love the setting, love the tone. I think so much of it is really, really strong. But the things that are wrong with it are very, very wrong with it. And that makes me struggle a little bit to put it up towards one of those top tier games.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So, anything 100%. Else that we forgot to talk about?
Just a fun little side note. I really like how some of the dinner scenes and the party talking at inns is a thread throughout the entirety of the game.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, even in those last 5-6 hours, you get less of that too.
And it's a little bit less captivating. I mean, understandably, the party has a lot of stuff on their minds.
Yeah, they probably don't have time to sit down and have dinner. I get it. The world's ending. I understand. But you know what? I really like those scenes. Please give them to me again.
Please just have some dinner conversation
You gotta eat at some point. I know the world's ending, but you gotta eat. No, I agree. I think that the dinner scenes are really good, and that gets back to characters, dialogue, NPC. The attention to detail with the translation, I think, is what stuck out to me this time around.
Yeah.
Well, I think that about wraps up our conversation about Grandia. Thank you so much for talking to me about this game. And, I know it's a long slog and it's confusing to talk about because there are so many different plot points that are so sort of minuscule and hard to keep track of. But I had a blast talking about it with you, Hilary.
Yeah, same.
So next month, or this month, I believe, later this month, we will have 2 episodes about Vagrant Story, which I know that a few people on staff are playing through, and maybe similarly to this one, have lots of very positive things to say about it, and maybe some less positive things to say. So I'll be curious to see what those panelists have to say. And then we're going to have the return of the RPG Fan Retro Encounter quiz show game, which I was a member of before, and it was a blast. And I'm going to do it again this time, so I'm really excited to be on that. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at retro@rpgfan.com. You can also comment on the message boards, visit our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, Discord. We have a Twitch stream every day. There are a million ways to get in touch with us, and we'd love to get feedback from you guys, either on social media or on whatever podcast listening venue you use, like iTunes, Google Play. We just love feedback. We also have 2 other awesome podcasts. One is Random Encounter, which is about current events, and it's hosted by Greg Delmage. And we also have Rhythm Encounter, which is about RPG music, and it's hosted by, well, no one at the moment because we haven't had an episode of that in a long time. Hilary, if anyone would like to get in touch with you personally, how can they do so?
The best way to get in touch with me is probably through Discord, and I'm EP Fire on the RPG Fan Discord. Or I'm Hilary@rpgfan.com as well.
And if you would like to get in touch with me personally, you can email me at zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can get me on Discord at zachw. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks again for doing this with me, Hilary. I had a blast talking to you. So thank you, listeners. Good night.
Good night.
And good luck.